The next event I want to talk about is rotate lights. That's going to be these two lights here. They're parented under this actor. This is just a kind of an empty actor. Probably just made, I don't know, child actor. Yeah, you can see the same thing. So this is just an empty actor. It just doesn't have anything other than some very basic information, including a pivot, which is what I used it for. I have these two point lights, and they are parented to this rectangular light pivot. We could just rename this so that it made more sense to light pivot. That's basically what it is. So the reason that I'm doing it this way is I want to have these two lights rotate around this the origin. Well, not really the origin, but I guess the center of the geometry here, which is indicated by the location of the light pivot. So if we go to the event graph, you can see we're getting the light pivot, which has been handily renamed. We're setting the relative rotation. We have a rotator. It's the exact same setup as we've seen before. Here's our rotate values. It's going to go from 0 to 180. So over the course of this timeline, let me roll that up a little bit. So 4.5 seconds almost, we're basically just going to do a full rotation here of these lights. And head back over to the event graph. And then I have the intensity that I'm also driving. So the intensity is going to start off being off, and then we'll go ahead and set the intensity here for point light 2. And that's actually, yeah, we are doing that, aren't we? So point light 2 is the one in the middle. That's going to be this one. So these two are going to rotate, and this one is going to kind of come on at the same time. And you can see that here when I play. So everything is nice and dark. And then we fade those lights on here. We rotate them around. And then the main light in the center comes on. And yeah, there's the final result. All right. So that is the rotate lights event. There may be a way that you could set the rotation pivot based on this relative rotation, but I'm not sure how to do it. It's just easier to go ahead and create a pivot where I want it to be, and then everything that's under that will rotate accordingly. The next thing here is explosion pulse. Once again, timeline. So we have a sphere. This explosion pulse object, let's see if I can find it here. This guy, it's just a sphere. And we're going to scale it very, very quickly. You can see all this stuff takes like 1/3 of a second. So we're going to go from a scale of 0 to a scale of 6 very, very quickly. So it's just going to expand to the point where it goes beyond what's visible. And then we've got an intensity on the emissive, and that's going to go from 100 to 0, and for a fresnel. So we can look at the material. That'll be informative here. Go to explosion pulse, element 0. All right, so what are we doing? So we have a color that is set to being fairly bright. You can see here in the value, it's at 100. And we're going to multiply that against this this mask here. Actually, this is a fresnel. So if I go to start previewing this node, you can see that we're essentially focusing this emissive value here on the edge, and then the fresnel is exposed as a parameter. I can't remember exactly what I do with it. Let's see. Come over here. So fresnel goes from like 2.5 to 3. So that's just going to sharpen it up a little bit. So if I come over here, go to fresnel and set this to 2.5, you can see we're like really pushing it towards the edge. And then once it gets to 3, it's like a very fine line. Probably that change is hardly even noticeable. And then we have intensity, which is going to just be an overall multiplier for this to be brighter or not. You can see the default value here is 100. If I set this to 0, this will just be black. Set it to white. It should be fairly bright. It's going to be this information. Yeah. Anyway, so, and then we've got this thing here, which I ended up not using, which is just a texture sample being multiplied in. It looked funky. And these are being plugged into both the emissive color and the opacity. And this is a translucent material. I think I probably have neglected to point that out on some of the other things. Yeah, unlit. So anyway, that is the material for my explosion pulse sphere, which we only see for just a few sweet little frames. And so beyond that, once we have set our relative scale, and I'm using that one value, like it goes from 0 to 6, in X, Y, and Z. So I didn't need to make a vector. I could just use the scalar value and pipe it in to this make vector node. And then let's see, we're setting the intensity and the fresnel. So these things are all modified. And then this right here, right? Okay, so on the material for the geometry, go ahead and we'll take a look at that. So it has basically the same setup where there's going to be a fresnel on it. We're going to multiply the color in. This thing I think I did leave on there, although you can't really see it. So it's not that distracting. We have an emissive parameter. This is just a regular metal value that goes into base color. The metallic is set to 1 because it is metal, and the roughness is whatever that needs to be. I can't remember, 0.5 or something. Or I was modifying this in the material instance, it's 0.25. And as this value goes up, it's going to get duller, and as it goes down, it's going to get shinier. So 0.25 was kind of the sweet spot. All right, so what's going on here? We have this emissive value. If I increase this, I can't remember what yeah, right. It's going to look like this. So what I wanted is for the letters to look like they were all super hot for a hot second. So that's what's going on here. So what I'm doing is I have my geometry, and I need to do something sort of specific here to the geometry. Because this is just a component, the component can be anything. It can be a Niagara system, it can be a piece of geometry, it can be a point light, whatever. So what I need to do here is I've got to modify a scalar parameter on a material. So only certain kinds of things can have materials. In this case, it's going to be these static mesh actors. So what I need to do is, and then the static mesh component is what owns the material thing. So I need to use this cast to static mesh component node. This is a super useful thing. So what's going on here is every single thing that is in my geometry array, which I have already predetermined manually by going through and setting that tag on them, and then adding them to this array, it's all geometry. But if I just pull out from here, you can see it's a scene component. And the scene component doesn't have a static mesh component, right? If I come over here, at least probably doesn't, right? So doesn't have a static mesh component. And because it doesn't have a static mesh component, there's no way to get access to this set scalar parameter value on materials node within context. So when you cast it to a static mesh component, what it's doing is it's saying, if this is successful, as in like you fed it the correct object, then you have access to all of the static mesh component methods which are available here. There's a bazillion things here, which is not that useful. But if you check out the Unreal Python API, it'll actually give you a list of everything that you can do with static mesh component. And I have a course, a free Python course available over at Epic, and I think I've actually linked it on my ArtStation page as well, that talks all about the Python API and how useful it is for this specific kind of thing, messing around with materials, and also the relationship between the API and blueprints. So I encourage you guys to check it out.